what's called a breakout maneuver, which is very dynamic. That's part of the reason why we have them in the suits. That's part of the reason why they're going to be strapped in. If something were to be detected that was off nominal, that could be a risk there. That's always a possibility. Of course, we're not expecting that. We are expecting Bob and Doug to exercise the hold functionality just outside waypoint 1 to do the manual piloting test.
And after that test is complete, they'll hand control back over to the Dragon spacecraft. It will resume its automated approach to the International Space Station. They'll move into the final waypoint, waypoint number 2, at which point they'll only be 20 meters away from station. And there we will have an automated hold where the teams will do a final go, no go just to push in for that final approach and docking. They'll move in pretty slowly, and then just seconds before docking, a little less than 30 seconds before, we may hear the call out for CHOP. That stands for the crew hands-off point, and this is literally just the point where the crew will not be sending any commands to the vehicle. It's all over to Dragon if any aborts need to be called, just due to the latency with the flight computer responding to crew actions at that point. And then we'll stand by for the contact and capture. Again, we are tracking
SpaceX Dragon from the PLT comm check. Dragon to ground.
I hear you loud and clear. Help me.
Loud and clear, Anna, and Doug and I have a good intercom check as well.
Copy. Good intercom checks. Let us know when you are done with that full suit donning procedure, and we'll bring you into suit leak checks.
So Bob Benkin hopping on the comms there. He used the acronym, or I guess the letters PLT for pilot.
Okay, for donning our gloves at this time.
We copy.
So for ISS missions for NASA, there are 4 seats in the Dragon spacecraft. If you were looking in from the side hatch, it would be seat 1 on the far right, all the way counting up to seat 4 on the far left. Doug Hurley in the commander or CDR seat, that's seat number 2. So it would be the second seat from the window.
Right.
Yeah, second from the right.
It goes backwards from the way we're normally taught to read. And so it is a little bit confusing when you're looking at it. Unless you're in the crew's point of view, and then it makes sense because you're going left to right, 1 to 4.
And Bob Benkin in the pilot seat right next to him. It's second from the left. And in front of them are those 3 displays and the button panel that we got a chance to see earlier that they'll be monitoring telemetry on and using to exercise that manual piloting test.
And it looks like the crew just has a couple of steps left until they're done getting into their suits, and then they'll go ahead and do another leak check. This will be the 3rd leak check they've done in these suits since their day started yesterday. They did an initial one when they got suited up in the operations and checkout facility down on the ground in Kennedy Space Center.
SpaceX Dragon, not Dragon to ground. We're complete 4.010.
Copy. Complete with 4.010 for suit donning. At this point, you are go to begin your suit leak check procedure.
We'll put 4.011 in work.
And so with that, the crew are going to step into leak checks again. This is going to be their 3rd one. They've already done one when they initially got suited up in the operations and checkout facility, another one once they climbed into Dragon when it was still on the pad and connected their suits via umbilical to the seats in the Dragon spacecraft.
SpaceX Dragon in 2.2, we are ready to pressurize.
And Dragon SpaceX on Dragon to ground, you are go to pressurize.
Okay, visors are down. We'll put that in work.
So now the crew going to step through and pressurize. Normally when the suits aren't pressurized, they can keep one of the zippers kind of just cracked open, and they're able to just flow cabin air through the spacesuit itself just to provide some cooling while they're inside. We can either flow nitrox into the suits. You could do that if you had a contaminated environment on board the Dragon spacecraft. It's something we also look for on the space station, and they had some air samplers out a little bit earlier, just looking for any trace contaminants in their breathing atmosphere. The suits also can have pure oxygen flown to them or flowed to them should the cabin itself depressurize. That'll happen below a certain PSI threshold, as we don't pressurize the suit all the way up to 14.7 PSI if we're in a depressurized environment. Otherwise, you would be in essentially a pretty big balloon, and it'd be really hard to move. So they pressurize it to a much lower threshold, and just to make up for the lack of oxygen, therefore in a lower density air, you'd be flowing them pure oxygen. So those suits just serving as another barrier protection for the crew for anything like a contaminated atmosphere or a depressurized cabin inside Dragon. But crew suited up now. Sounds like we're about to step through these leak checks.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit there, so as you're listening to comms, there's some call-outs for 4.010 and 4.011. Those are referring to procedures that the crew have on the spacecraft. So they have procedures built into their displays. These two just happen to be the two that they're running right now. They also have those on their tablets, so they can follow along there if they needed to. We were also talking a little bit about 14.7 PSI. I know you and I both have engineering backgrounds, but if you don't have an engineering background, the atmospheric pressure at roughly sea level, sometimes referred to as 1 atmosphere, is roughly about 14.68 to 14.7 PSI. So if you're at sea level right now, or pretty close to, what you're walking around in is 14 pounds per square inch of force about on your body. And that's roughly what the Dragon capsule is also at when they're flying up.
While those leak checks are in work, the station itself is in the docking attitude. We get to do a pretty cool thing with station during the docking of the Crew Dragon. Normally, the station's attitude, or which way it's pointing, is controlled by these very large gyroscopes called control moment gyros. And it's a pretty efficient way, only using electricity to keep these large gyros spinning, pointing in opposite directions to help stabilize the station. It's a very large spacecraft, so using thrusters a little more work intensive. We actually switch over to the Russian thrusters during the initial docking of the Dragon spacecraft, and then after that,
SpaceX Dragon on Dragon to ground. We saw 2 big leak checks.
In Dragon SpaceX on Dragon to ground, we saw the same. Great news, thanks.
we just got confirmation 2 good leak checks on those suits, so another milestone down as they continue their approach. But just to finish that thought, we're on Russian thrusters right now, controlling the attitude on board the space station. We'll flip over back to the control moment gyros, so those are over in the U.S. segment once we make that initial soft capture, just because we don't want, during that final pull-in of that soft capture ring before we get to that ready to latch, the thruster controls of the attitude can be a little bit more jarring. So we switch back over to the control moment gyros and then let Dragon resume its hard mate. But all that coming up in just about 2 hours, hopefully, away from our targeted docking time, right around 7:30 a.m. Pacific here in Hawthorne. But everything continuing to go well. We had that approach initiation burn happen about 16 minutes ahead of schedule. In just under 8 minutes now, we'll do our mid-course burn, and then we're standing by for that arrival at waypoint 0 in just under 28 minutes from now.
Now on your screen is a view of the Dragon spacecraft from the International Space Station. We're on the sunlit side of the Earth, so daytime for those folks. Middle of the day, I'm sure. Right now, actually, Dragon is just about to fly over the Caspian Sea. So if the clouds sort of break a little bit, we may get some cool views of planet Earth behind us. once that suit lead check is complete, Bob and Doug might pop open their visors. Those can come open for their comfort. So maybe hear some calls about that coming up here.
Right now, Dragon just continuing to close its way in. Right now we're about 2.5 kilometers away from the station, so just a little over 1.5 miles. Cruising at a rate of about 3 meters per second, or about 6.7 miles per hour.
Muszę iść. Nie musimy to robić. A teraz dalszy stretching.
The Cronus flight controller over in Houston, controlling this camera outside the station, controlling it from that mission control center on the ground, giving us a nice zoomed out view as the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station actually just flying over Kazakhstan. They are a few hundred miles to the west right now of Baikonur, which until yesterday has been the only gateway to orbit for our U.S. crew members to the International Space Station. So they're going to make a pass just to the north of Baikonur. We're looking at Kazakhstan in the background, but with this, a U.S. vehicle launched on a U.S. rocket from U.S. soil, now in the mix, a new era and a new path to station for our NASA crew members.
That's right. Actually, Chris Cassidy would have blasted off out of Baikonur not that long ago on a Soyuz vehicle, so he would have been launching from right where the crew are flying over right now.
Everything's still looking smooth with their trip up to station. We're about 4.5 minutes away from the mid-course burn. We should be arriving at waypoint 0, which we may pause at, we may go right past, depending on how all the Dragon systems are looking for the teams down here on the ground in Hawthorne and the team over in Mission Control Houston. We'll get to that waypoint 0 at about 24 minutes from now, and then continue on to waypoint 1, at which point we'll watch Dragon go from the bottom of the station, where it's going to be on what's known as the R bar, or the radial vector. That's if you drew a line straight through the International Space Station down to planet Earth. Dragon's going to be pausing or going right through 400 meters on that line, and then it's going to swing itself up out in front and align itself with the docking adapter on the Node 2 forward port, and they're going to pause at about 220 meters away from the station.
Yeah, right now Dragon is in a pointing mode that has a variety of guidance and navigation control sensors pointed directly at the station. Earlier on in the webcast, we actually got a few glimpses, I think, thermal images of the International Space Station. So we had a cool side-by-side of the space station and Dragon next to each other, views relative to each other. So those sensors are pointed at the station right now. Right now, Dragon's attitude control system is trying to maintain its attitude, not allow any sort of roll or any sort of motion that it might pick up from just as it's flying towards the station. That's part of the reason we've had those great views looking at the forward hatch and where we can see the nose cone. Right now, that's that little dark dot at the bottom of your screen. You can see it highlighted against the clouds as we're flying over the middle of, might be over Russia, I think, right now. Fortunately, my ground trek map does not tell me all of the country labels, so.
It looks like we're still over Kazakhstan. We should be over Russia for a short little bit in a few minutes, and then they'll fly out over northern Mongolia, continue down, flying over northeastern China, make a pass over the Korean Peninsula, out over Japan, and by that point, they'll be in an orbital nighttime. So moving pretty quickly, a little over 17,000 miles an hour. But relative to each other, their speeds are pretty close. Dragons are only moving in at a rate of about 2.4 meters per second.
To
right now.
jest
So
rakieta.
we're a little under 1,800 meters away from the space
co
station at this
jest?
point. Standing by for the mid-course burn, and at this rate, we're going to get to waypoint 0, so just 400 meters below the station in just under 22 minutes.
Yeah, and we talked about the approach ellipsoid and the keep out sphere a little bit earlier, but around the space station there's a 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer ellipse. That's an imaginary shape around the space station, which is designed to help vehicles make sure that they're staying clear of the station unless they have business to conduct, which of course the Demo 2 mission does today with docking at the station. So being 400 meters below along the R bar, as Dan had mentioned earlier, will be well within that approach ellipsoid, but not quite within the 200-meter keep out sphere around the station. So that'll happen when we get just past waypoint 1, which is waypoint 1 is at that 220 meters away from station there.
Dragon at this very moment only a mile away from the International Space Station, so it's continuing to close in. We should be just seconds away from the start of that mid-course burn. This just to help fine-tune its path up towards waypoint 1, or waypoint 0 rather, just 400 meters below the space station, which will get there in about 20 minutes. About halfway there, though, the teams will do a go-no-go if they're just going to pass waypoint 1 and then move on to, they'll go past waypoint 0 onto waypoint 1. Try to keep everything lined up here for you, not to confuse you. We'll have 3 waypoints. It'll be waypoint 0, 400 meters below the station, waypoint 1, 220 meters out in front of the International Space Station, and then waypoint 2, just 20 meters in front of that docking port on the Node 2 forward port. And so we're going to move through all of those quickly. We should be in the mid-course burn at this point, and so Dragon just doing a slight adjustment as it continues to swing up. It's eventually going to be just 400 meters directly below the International Space Station. Bob and Doug strapped into their seats, suited up, along for the ride for now, as this is automated, but we won't be automated the whole way since this is a demo flight.
Yeah, and actually on the screen tour, I guess on the right side of your screen, there you saw some orange blips that represents the service section Draco engines firing. So there's 12 of those on the service section or the trunk of the vehicle. And once we get through this mid-course maneuver, we'll probably hear some words from the core to Bob and Doug letting them know.
That's right, and we do have confirmation that the AI mid-course, the approach initiation mid-course burn is underway. Again, we expect this one to last a little over a minute. And this is, again, just a really fine-tune approach.
All of these maneuvers are pretty small at this point.
Burn complete, nominal burn. Trajectory has converged on waypoint 0.
Copy, nominal burn.
There's those 2 words, nominal burn. So we won't have any more significant burns. We're still going to be using those engines, obviously, for the final approach maneuvers, but at this point, Dragon now approaching waypoint 0.
And really at this point, it's all relative maneuvers, a very slow and steady approach to the station. Of course, that small translational test with Bob and Doug commanding Dragon to do some small manual piloting maneuvers.
Things are They're going to start to darken, but hopefully we'll still be able to keep Dragon in view as they are crossing pretty soon into an orbital nighttime. At this moment, we're less than a mile away from station. Dragon just under 1,200 meters away, continuing to close the gap. Pretty slow rate right now, moving in at only about 1.7 meters per second. We're going to be standing by. There's going to be an internal go-no-go poll about passing waypoint 0. That should be coming up in about 7 minutes. We'll continue to listen in with the teams. We're expecting Dragon's arrival at waypoint 0, which we heard its trajectory has converged on. So that means Dragon pointed in the right direction on its way to that waypoint just 400 meters below the space station.
Yeah, and to maybe put that 1.7 meters meters per second in perspective, if there are any runners or joggers listening, that's a pretty reasonable pace jog. So right now the spacecraft is moving towards the ISS about as fast as if you were going on a morning jog.
All right, so at this point, we're inside the approach ellipsoid that we were talking about. So as Dragon moves inside of just about 1 kilometer away, again, the approach ellipsoid is an elliptical shape, 4 kilometers long by 2 kilometers tall by 2 kilometers wide, essentially a 3-dimensional oval. And that's just one of those checkpoints around the station that governs the approach of visiting vehicles. Before we were in this point, Dragon was on a 24-hour free safe trajectory. So if we had lost control of Dragon, it would have been at least 24 hours before we moved inside. But we're now inside this approach ellipsoid. Dragon given the go as it was given the authority to do the approach initiation burn. So that next imaginary gateway around the space station is the keep out sphere. That one's a little bit smaller, has a radius of only 200 meters, and we won't be crossing that until we're done with the manual flight test, but we'll do the go-no-go to cross that sphere well in advance of them actually moving in.
Yeah, in about 14 minutes from now, there'll be a small correction maneuver to take us from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1 right outside the keep out sphere. So if we have a video of Dragon at that point, you may see the Draco thrusters firing. Right now, vehicle looking healthy as it's making its way towards that R-bar approach, just 400 meters below the International Space Station.
Dragon as it continues to close in. The station and Dragon right now just over the northeastern part of China. They are in an orbital nighttime, so the sun is setting on both vehicles right now as they're flying about 262 statute miles over the surface of planet Earth. 2 crew members, NASA's Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, inside Dragon, closing in on their home for the next several months, completing the first crewed flight of the commercial crew program era to the International Space Station. So we should be under 2 hours away from the planned docking time. We were looking at a docking around 7:30 a.m. Over here on the West Coast. but they were able to move through a number of their maneuvers a little bit quicker. We've got about 16 minutes ahead of the approach initiation burn, so that docking time will be a little bit variable and will hinge on how quickly they're able to move through that second manual flight test. But everything continuing to go smoothly. We're waiting for their arrival at waypoint 0. Should be coming up in just about 12 minutes from now.
O. Muszę spędzić. Teraz jest kart. Check.
Dragon SpaceX on Big Loop. The ground is go for approach 0.
Yes.
We will be enabling the maneuver shortly. The expected maneuver start time is 1256 UTC. Reminder that Dragon will nominally continue approach through waypoint 1 toward waypoint 2 without stopping at waypoint 1.
Next Dragon on the Big Loop, we copy go, and 12:56.
Good copy.
All right, so we heard both teams, the NASA and SpaceX teams, are go to continue on past waypoint 0. So they'll be coming up on that point in about 10 minutes from now, and they're just going to continue on along up until waypoint 1. So it'll be a quick pass through. They'll go from just 400 meters directly below the International Space Station up to waypoint 1. So they're going to do pretty much a 90-degree maneuver to go from directly below station to directly in front of it. And this is always something really cool to see. So you're seeing city lights on the ground below Dragon right now as we continue to fly. We just made a pass over Japan, so those were city lights in Japan as Dragon and the station just made a pass over, and now they're about to cross over the northern Pacific Ocean. So things will be dark for a little while as Dragon continues to close in. We should have sunrise coming up at about 21 minutes after the hour. So if everything holds on track, we should have some good sunlight for docking, hopefully, but we'll have lights on board the Dragon itself. You can see the red and the green telling us where it is as it continues to approach. At this moment, we are just about 585 meters away. Some commands to Dragon.
That's right, on the displays, they have some commands in the upper right-hand corner. We got a little sneak peek at that while they did one of their video sessions showing us the displays earlier in this mission. And they'll command a hold once they get to about 220 meters away from the station. That's where they'll conduct that manual piloting test.
And again, and this will be their second manual piloting of the Dragon spacecraft. We were able to watch them yesterday.
Copy that. We're ready.
Yesterday, shortly after getting on orbit, they were able to take control of Dragon and go through a number of pointing maneuvers or attitude adjustments. And in this case, they're going to be doing pretty much the second half of everything. When you're flying a spacecraft, you're worrying about attitude adjustments, and then you're worrying about translational adjustments. And this is going to be their chance to do those translational maneuvers.
Wow. Dwie motory ma zapnute. Co zwróciłem się na waypointy.
Yeah, and once they finish that manual piloting test, then Dragon will take over. They'll transition and go towards waypoint 2. That'll put them just 20 meters away from space station.
All right, well, as we're just about 5.5 minutes to their arrival and quick pass through waypoint 0, let's jump over to Gary Jordan over at Mission Control Houston to check how everything's lining up with the teams in Houston for this approach and docking. Gary?
Thanks, Dan. Really good to see Dragon, Bob, and Doug inside 500 meters, so close to the International Space Station, just flying through all of the milestones we have to get towards docking towards the International Space Station. A lot of prep work went into this moment. Just previously, we transitioned control of the station's attitude to Russian thrusters. Also configured the station itself for the docking attitude. Chris Cassidy was just finishing up his midday meal. His next activity, just a little bit more than 20 minutes from now, will begin to set up for Dragon monitoring. He has a tool called the RPOP. We'll be able to display some of the telemetry data coming from Dragon through the C2V2. This is the common communication for visiting vehicles. It's established a link between the International Space Station and Dragon. Dragon's telemetry data, all the information being relayed through the International Space Station. And Cassidy will be able to monitor from this tool, again, setting up in just about 20 minutes. Everything going according to plan from the International Space Station side of things, getting great views from Dragon of the International Space Station. Look at that, the lights reflecting from the outside of the International Space Station turned on. So Bob and Doug have a very clear view of the International Space Station. Should be entering into an orbital sunrise here shortly. From there, we'll take you through the next few maneuvers, again passing waypoint 1 and going right into that manual flight test. Again, everything here from Mission Control Houston, International Space Station configured for docking. Everything's go from our end. Back over to you in Hawthorne.
All right, thanks, Gary. We're jumping in now with Bob and Doug inside the Crew Dragon. Again, you're able to see what they're looking at on those displays there, and this a view from the Dragon spacecraft itself. You can see the International Space Station continuing to close in. Right now, they're only about 430 meters away. They're going to be quickly passing through waypoint 0 in the next 3 minutes, and they're going to continue their way up to waypoint number 1, which is going to be just about 220 meters out in front of the station itself.
Yeah, and Dragon has a number of relative navigation sensors, items that are used for guidance and control of the vehicle. So right now, Dragon's in a pointing mode that has those relative navigation sensors trained on the space station, with the attitude control system making minor adjustments as it needs to if there's any roll correction or anything that it needs to perform. And Bob and Doug getting closer and closer to that manual flight test.
Wow.
They looked pretty comfy in those seats So that view right behind him.
Yeah, they are suited up, and again, they get suited up for anything we consider kind of the dynamic operations inside the spacecraft. So anytime that they're either in an approach and docking maneuver or an undocking maneuver, and then obviously at the very start and the very end of their missions, which are probably the most dynamic phases, that launch an asset and then that deorbit and splashdown when they come home and splash down in the Atlantic. We are just 420 meters away from the space station, less than a third of a mile. Should be just about a minute and a half until we're passing through waypoint 0, and then Dragon's going to begin a little over 20-minute, about the 25-minute trip up to the docking axis. So this will be waypoint 1. There'll be 220 meters directly in front of the station, and it'll be lined up perfectly with that international docking adapter at the very forward port of the Node 2 module, also known as Harmony, on the space station.
Yeah, and there'll be a small attitude correction there. The navigation and prop specialists on our team will monitor that burn. And then hopefully we'll hear some words from the core to the crew, letting them know that we've had a good course correction towards waypoint 1.
Again, things are a little bit dark right now. We should have sunrise in about 25 minutes. And so things will light up as we get closer to that manual flight test, and hopefully by the time we're there, we'll be right in front of the space station itself. We should get some good light on Dragon, and hopefully some views from the station looking straight out
Sometimes
at
när
the
vi
spacecraft
pojkar då.
using the cameras that are right next to that docking port on Node 2. And then Bob and Doug will once again take the controls using those touchscreens to maneuver Dragon. They'll do a number of different translational maneuvers. So physically moving the Dragon spacecraft in space. Oh, we're seeing some thruster firings there. And so those are using some of those, we call them the service section Draco thrusters. There's 12 around the lower part of the Dragon spacecraft.
Very cool to see those Dracos firing. They actually use a hypergolic propellant, so it's monomethylhydrazine and nitrox, which very, very handy because you mix those two propellants together and they make fire, which is exactly what you want when you want a reliable engine when you're doing these proximity maneuvers. So nice to see those.
Dragon SpaceX on Big Loop, approach 0 has started and the trajectory has converged on waypoint 1. Expect arrival at waypoint 1 at 1322 UTC.
Dragon copies on the Big Loop, 13:22.
So those words from Anna there, confirming good convergence. So what that means is the trajectory of the spacecraft is now syncing up with where waypoint 0, waypoint 1 would be when both spacecraft are moving forward in time. So that means that Dragon will be right where it needs to be. And we're expecting Dragon to reach waypoint 1 about 25 minutes from now.
Yeah, and that still puts us about 16 minutes ahead of the original timeline. So we're expected to arrive at waypoint 1 at 13:22 UTC, or 6:22 a.m. over here on the West Coast in Hawthorne. And if we continue to track about 16 or so minutes early, we may get to that docking a little bit early as well. Again, we were tracking right around 7:30 a.m. Over here on the West Coast. So we may be more in the neighborhood of about the 7:15, but obviously that just depends on how all of the additional maneuvers go. But Dragon so far moving ahead of schedule in its flight to the International Space Station. We've moved past waypoint 0, so we're inside 400 meters right now, just under 370 meters away from the station. Already converged on its next stop, is going to be waypoint 1. And once it gets there, again, the crew is going to jump in and command a hold before they move into their manual piloting test. All right, it is 6 a.m. here in Hawthorne. If you're just now tuning in, the Dragon spacecraft well in range of the International Space Station right now, just 350 meters away. We've stepped through all of our procedures, all of our burns, all of our maneuvers to get Dragon to this point since we launched just a little over 17 and a half hours ago. Dragon was able to make all of its maneuvers to get it on the same orbital plane as the International Space Station, and we've already begun integrated operations between the teams here in Hawthorne and those out in Mission Control Houston, and now we're just really getting into some of the final steps before Dragon makes it to the space station.
Yeah, and on your screen right now we're in orbital night, so the Earth is blocking the sun, but you can see the lights from the Dragon spacecraft. That flashes a light that's right along the forward hatch. Right now, Dragon is in a relative pointing mode that's pointed directly at the space station and making its way towards waypoint 1, which is about 220 meters below the station. The International Space Station, when we're doing proximity operations, has a couple of imaginary gates. They're sort of three-dimensional shapes around the space station for vehicles that are approaching. Right now, we're moving towards a hold just outside of the 200-meter keep-out sphere. And Bob and Doug aboard, currently seated in their spacesuits, monitoring the transition. And when they get to 1.1, they'll issue a hold to conduct a manual flight test on this test flight mission.
This will be their second manual flight test, and really the second key objective for them to really put Dragon through the ringers. This is a demonstration flight. This is that final test before we certify the SpaceX Dragon to operationally carry full crew complements to the International Space Station. They were able to complete their first flight test shortly after getting on orbit. That one, they focused on changing Dragon's attitude, using the Earth as a guide to put Dragon in a very specific orientation known as local vertical, local horizon, essentially putting it in an orientation the same as a plane flying over the surface of the Earth. So the attitude control of Dragon, just one part of, or really one half of controlling a spacecraft. Now they're going to be testing out the translational maneuvers. So once they command that hold, the first thing that they'll do is align Dragon very precisely with the actual docking axis, and then they'll step through and send a number of commands to the spacecraft through those touch screens, moving it across a couple of different axes. So again, translational means you're moving left, right, forward, backwards, up, down, and that's one half of really controlling the spacecraft, is you have all of these different axes to worry about, both translational and for attitude. So they'll step through those. Depending on how those go, we'll then be able to move in for the final approach.
Yeah, that's right. One thing to
Don't stick
consider
it
with
to
the
the ground.
spacecraft is it is a three-dimensional body that's moving in space. So you not only have to control your X, Y, Z position, that up, down, left, right, forward, back motion, but you also have to control which direction you're pointing. So we've alluded to the sim online that starts you off in a skewed attitude. Anytime you're pointed in a different direction, then do those translations. You have extra motions that you need to cancel out in space.
Yeah, I remember the simulation too can show you how deceiving it can be to fly in space, because when you initially look at it and you load up, it almost looks like you're already pointing directly at the docking port, and I just need to go straight, when in fact you need to physically move the capsule down and left and roll it so you're completely lined up, and then change which direction you're pointing. It's just infinitely more complex than just getting in your car and doing a left, doing a right, going forward, backward. You're operating in all dimensions when you're flying in microgravity in a spacecraft. So Dragon doing that autonomously right now. The crew will step in to do some manual control, just to again prove out the Dragon systems for the crew to jump in should they have to. Ooh, looks like we're getting some thunderstorms actually on the Earth below. Let's see where they're flying over. We're still over the Pacific Ocean. We just flew over the island of Fiji in this orbital nighttime, about 264 statute miles over a restless planet Earth.
Beautiful to see those views of the planet. Even more beautiful when we had orbital daytime. But we had some really cool shots. There's one point when we flew over the Caspian Sea, saw some really cool clouds there, and I think we also saw nighttime over Japan as we were flying over the Terminator.
Yeah, we're able to see a couple of city lights on the Earth's surface below. We're a little more than halfway through this orbital nighttime. We should be getting sunrise in about 15 minutes from now. And at that point, we will be just about arriving at waypoint 1. So we should be getting sunrise right as Dragon is arriving, just about 220 meters out in front of the space station.
Here's a cool view from the station camera. You can see Dragon approaching. We've just got those red and green lights on either side of the capsule. It gives folks looking at the capsule a sense of orientation of the vehicle. And here's a view from Dragon. Dragon's got a number of relative navigation sensors, as well as a couple of cameras that can look forward. That will hopefully get some additional views for as we get closer to docking. So here's a good view of the space station. Pretty cool. You can actually you can see the solar panels and actually the thermal radiators there. Here's a great view from a camera behind Bob and Doug. Bob in the right-hand seat in the pilot seat, Doug in the commander seat or the CDR seat. You've got a display in front of them. That's the forward view. It's got some procedural information on the left-hand side that's telling them criteria that they're looking for. Anything off nominal, they could, of course, step in and issue a command if necessary. And then on the left-hand and right-hand screen, we're actually their piloting controls. So when the vehicle is in an appropriate state to receive those commands, they can just hop in and use those touch-sensitive gloves, issue commands to the vehicle's attitude control system.
Have a little over 13 and a half minutes still in this maneuver. It is really cool to get this look inside. And again, that screen in the middle, you can see the trajectory that Dragon is on. And if they were to just continue, it would eventually take them on a path away from the International Space Station. But at the very top of really their orbital path right now, they'll converge on a point just 220 meters directly in front of the space station. So once they do get to that point, they'll be able to command a hold and have the vehicle essentially hover just a few hundred meters in front of the space station itself. They're moving at a pretty slow pace right now, but again, slow and steady wins the race whenever we're doing these docking maneuvers in close proximity to the station. We have about 13 minutes to go. They're moving at less than half a tenth of a meter per second as they continue to close in.
There's another view from the space station looking back, and there's a brief moment there when we were looking at Doug's display where you could see that same view that we had of the International Space Station.
Oh.
So they have the vehicle overlaid on their displays to give them some awareness of their relative motion to the space station. Especially handy if they had to actually step in for manual piloting to dock. Fingers crossed they won't have to do that today, though, and that the flight control system will operate as intended.
We'll get the manual piloting demo, and then it'll be handed over to Dragon to do a nice, smooth operated, automated docking. Again, we've not been tracking any issues with the Dragon spacecraft on the whole flight uphill. Been moving through each of these burns a little bit ahead of schedule, running about 16 minutes or so ahead of the timeline as it was originally mapped out.
Yeah, very, very healthy vehicle, this test flight, very little. I'm sure Bob and Doug have a few things as well that they're getting used to. There's only so much a simulator can train you on. I think they had mentioned a little bit of that during the ascent portion. There are a few things that are a little different than what they expected. But just because when you're actually launching on a rocket, that's a different feeling than sitting in a training capsule.
Yeah, can't quite simulate a 9-minute ride on top of a controlled explosion in an office. But as they did give credit to the teams here at SpaceX, the actual piloting of the spacecraft went off exactly like their simulators. And so they're able to do all of that training here in Hawthorne, both in a cockpit simulator and in a full mock-up of the Dragon spacecraft itself, even able to get fully suited, plugged into the seats, go through all of the different systems that they had to get familiar with before they moved into their flight today.
Yeah, you and Jesse actually had a really cool opportunity to step in and see the training capsule. The team that I work on actually gets to help train the astronauts that are coming through, so I've had some cool opportunities to interface with the Crew 1 crew. They've already started their training for the Dragon vehicle.
Yeah, you get the really cool job. I get to come tag along every once in a while. But yeah, it was really exciting to literally sit in the seat where Bob and Doug were as they prepared for this mission. It was really exciting.
Station at Houston on the big loop for Chris, crew monitor. Do that. Chris, you can begin to monitor the approach per step 1 of 1.104 crew Dragon approach and retreat monitor.
Wow.
Begin work.
So heard some cool stuff over the loops there. Looks like Chris Cassidy aboard the station is getting ready to monitor. We'd sort of talked about this earlier, but during the Demonstration 1 mission, the crew aboard the International Space Station had issued commands to Dragon. That's a capability that they have. So
Yeah, so with Chris Cassidy now monitoring, we're a little under 9 minutes away from that arrival at waypoint 1. Let's jump over to Gary real quick for a quick station update, and he can walk us through some of the systems that are going to be in play during this manual piloting test. Gary?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, we're monitoring the approach of Bob and Doug. Now just about 300 meters from station, heading towards that waypoint 1. One of the next milestones here coming up is going to be the manual flight test. Chris Cassidy already getting in position in front of the RPOP. This is the rendezvous software that he'll be using to watch some of the demonstration and the rest of the docking procedures for Bob and Doug as they move in to dock with the International Space Station. Right at about the time of the manual flight test, they will be communicating through the C2V2 Common Communication for Visiting Vehicle. You heard the call on the big loop. That was Joshua Kutrick here in Mission Control Houston, Capcom, talking with International Space Station Commander Chris Cassidy all over the big loop. That's an integrated communication loop with space to ground on station, Dragon to ground on Dragon, everybody hearing the same thing. Once we're in position of the manual flight test, C2V2 will transition to receive video as well. We should be getting some great video from Dragon all through the hardware that is on the International Space Station, integrated and linked with the Dragon. Now just inside 300 meters from station, I'll toss it back over to Hawthorne as we go through these next steps, heading towards waypoint 1.
Right on. Thanks for that update, Gary.
As Gary said, we're inside 300 meters away from the space station. Should be getting that arrival at waypoint 1 in just about 6.5 minutes. And then we'll see some dynamic action pickup with Bob and Doug stepping in to command a hold to the Dragon spacecraft and then step into their manual piloting test. Just to give you a long look at everything, we were originally tracking the docking just a few seconds before 7:30 a.m. Pacific time. We have been moving well ahead of the timeline, so we may only be about an hour away from docking at this point, as they're moving about 16 or 17 minutes ahead of schedule so far with all of Dragon's maneuvers. We'll consider that initial contact and capture of the vehicle to be that initial docking. After that, though, there are a series of steps that have to take place with the Dragon vehicle, actually done in concert with the station itself, which will do a quick handover of its attitude control systems, and then the soft capture ring on the Dragon spacecraft will begin to retract, and then a series of latches or a series of indicators will tell the Dragon spacecraft when it's ready to start driving hooks, which will secure it very firmly to the international docking adapter on the very forward Node 2 port on the International Space Station. And then once we have docking complete, there will be a series of steps both for the crew on Dragon and for the crew on the International Space Station.
Yeah, that's right. Once docking is complete, the cavity in between the PMA node and Dragon, which we refer to as the vestibule, that is still a vacuum. So we'll do some steps there to bring air in from the International Space Station to pressurize that volume. There'll be a leak check on that volume to make sure that we truly have a good seal. Don't want to lose that precious life support to the vacuum of space. And then, of course, when we pressurize that volume, that area has been exposed to space for a pretty long period of time, and we're expanding a gas into it. So the temperatures will fall in there a little bit. So there'll be a period of time for a thermal hold to wait for temperatures to stabilize and to confirm that the pressure is good. So once all those things are good, then we can hopefully open the hatch, the forward hatch.
We do expect it'll take about an hour and a half or so typically before we start seeing hatches opened between the station and the Dragon spacecraft following a docking. And there are going to be two hatches. The first on the station side is the A-Pass hatch. That one will get open first, and then we'll wait for everything just to make sure that, again, we're at an equalized pressure between the cabin inside Dragon and the now open hatchway on the station side before Bob and Doug are able to open up the Dragon hatch. A number of other things are taking place while we're waiting for the hatch opening to occur. Dragon, once it's docked to the space station, will be able to connect via an umbilical to transfer power from the International Space Station, so no longer needing to use its own solar arrays to power batteries and all the systems on board, be able to draw power.
Dragon SpaceX for Approach 1 on Big Loop. Approach 1 and the soft capture ring extension will begin shortly. Command a hold 20 seconds after beginning Approach 1 for the manual piloting demo.
Taxi's on the Big Loop. 20 seconds after Approach 1, we will command the hold.
Good copy.
And so real quick, what they're referring to there, in about 2.5 minutes, we'll be at waypoint 1, so about 220 meters out in front of the space station. And then, just like waypoint 0, the vehicle able to bypass waypoint 1 and continue on its approach to the space station. The crew is going to jump in 20 seconds after they hear that Approach 1 has started, command a hold, and then they're going to move into that second manual piloting demonstration on board Dragon. So we should see that all start to happen in just about 2 minutes, and thankfully, as promised, the sun starting to come up on both of our spacecraft.
Yeah, they also mentioned the soft capture system, so they'll do an extension of a ring with 3 pedal-like structures on it that are covered in micro switches and sensors, and when we do finally get to waypoint 2 and final approach for docking, those will interface with the international docking adapter and give us a confirmation that we've made what's called soft capture. Now at that point, the spacecraft may have some relative motion, so that system helps get rid of any of that relative motion before we go in for final closure of the hard capture hooks.
So just a little under a minute to go now. Dragon just about right out in front of the International Space Station. Again, in less than a minute, it'll begin its Approach 1, and then our crew members inside of Dragon will command the vehicle to stop. It will hover, and then they will be able to begin that manual piloting demonstration.
Just about 240 meters away from the space station. We're pretty much lined up right in front of it along what we've been calling the V-bar, and you may hear that on comms.
Do have a short communications blockage with the space station. We have pretty continuous coverage. We've had pretty continuous coverage getting views from the station cameras, which come down through our higher data rate, our KU band antenna. Sometimes it can actually get blocked by some of the station structure, whether it's solar arrays or other pieces of the station, depending on where the actual TDRS satellite that it's pointing at is located. And it looks like we do have that blockage for the next 5 minutes or so. And then once that clears up and we have a clear line of sight for that antenna, we'll get that video back from the International Space Station. So we're expecting that to come about 28 minutes after the hour, so in about 5 minutes from now.
The ground control teams still certainly have good data to both Dragon and the International Space Station, so they're still able to monitor what's happening. Have good telemetry, so different sensors, the velocity of the vehicle, how the prop is doing, if any thrusters are firing, what commands are being sent.
We just had a quick TDRS handover for Dragon, so transitioning between those tracking and data relay satellites, and standing by for confirmation of that hold.
Station, it's Houston on the big loop for Chris monitoring. Station, in preparation for Endeavour's manual piloting demo, you can monitor now per block Charlie in 1.104, Crew Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Copy, block Charlie.
Dragon SpaceX on big loop. Expect reconfiguration of the C2V2 return link shortly.
Copy.
All right, so we had confirmation the crew was able to send that hold. They're at right about 203 meters away from the space station right now, it looks like.
So right now just flying in formation right in front of the space station, which is really cool.
Again, we should be getting the video views from the station itself back in just about 2 minutes from now. But yeah, Dragon holding just about 200, a little over 200 meters directly out in front. They're going to take a few moments to reconfigure C2V2, that common communication for visiting vehicles, to begin getting some higher data rates to get video from Dragon through the station as we begin to step into this near-field manual piloting demo. And just a reminder, Bob and Doug are going to be doing some translational maneuvers, so they're going to precisely align the Dragon with the docking axis, so lining it up directly in the center of the docking target, and then they'll begin to move along a number of different axes through translations, forward, backward, up, down, left, right, just another test of the manual control function on board the Dragon spacecraft. And then once they're complete with that, they'll put Dragon back into automated control and begin to move in towards the final waypoint, waypoint 2, just 20 meters in front of Dragon. So before we start that, we do need to wait until we get that high data rate communication with the station locked back up. Again, should be just about another minute or so until that's in place.
And hopefully when we get that high data rate communication back, we'll also get some views into the cabin behind Bob and Doug. We got a few cool views of that earlier as they were getting closer and closer to station. So if you're just joining us,
Station, Houston on the big loop for Chris. Dragon's now transmitting docking camera video. We want to confirm that video and data is updating in the Dragon 2 docking monitor.
Work.
Copy confirmed, thanks.
So as I was mentioning earlier, if you're just now joining us, Dragon is now just 220 meters in front of the space station. The astronauts aboard, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, have commanded a manual hold. That's to perform a manual piloting test. There is a very nice shot of the Dragon vehicle from cameras aboard the space station. You just saw one of the Draco thrusters there firing, just to keep it in that hold attitude, flying right in front of the station.
Yeah, we have two cameras on the very forward port of Node 2, so right where Dragon's going to be headed following the completion of this manual piloting test.
SpaceX on Big Loop, the 2 link reconfiguration is complete. The soft capture ring extension is also complete.
Dragon copies on the Big Loop. Good ring extension and C2V2 reconfig.
So those comms on the Big Loop, the core, the crew operations and resources engineer here at SpaceX letting the crew know that we have a good TDRS link again, good C2V2 link again. It's common communications for visiting vehicles. And we actually heard a little bit earlier as well, comms to Chris Cassidy to monitor this manual piloting test.
Dragon SpaceX on Big Loop, you are go to execute the proximity manual flight test per procedure 4.041, and I have the target fuel levels when you are ready to copy.
Copy or go for 4.041, and we're ready to copy the fuel constraint.
Your 1/3 fuel usage will be 60.9, 2/3 58.9, and terminate 57.9.
We copy 60.9, 58.9, and 57.9. We'll pick up in 4.041.
Good copy, and we're with you.
All right, so they're going to start maneuvering Dragon again, making some translational maneuvers. We did get some insight that it looks like they're a little bit to the left of the docking axis right now, and so we should expect them to move directly into the center line as one of their first maneuvers. That's going to be their very first maneuver. And then they have a strict list of choreographed steps just to test out moving on the other axes. And we heard the core Anna Menon calling up the expected fuel usage inside Dragon. They're going to be keeping a close eye on that just to make sure they're not overusing the propellant in this flight test, making sure we still have good margins for all of the approach maneuvers, and then obviously for everything at the end of the mission itself.
Yeah, and the thrusters that we're using here.
On the Big Loop, we are commencing with docking axis capture.
We are following along with you.
So the thrusters that we expect to see firing here would be on the service section or on the trunk. And you'll see some plumes coming out from the shot on your screen.
co se změnil článek.
First part of this maneuver is just to really line them up perfectly with that docking axis. So they were already several meters off once this hold occurred, and so they're making very low impulse commands being sent to those Draco thrusters. Again, as Shiva was saying, there's the 12 around the lower part of the Dragon capsule that they're going to be using, and we're seeing small bursts now.
Yeah, and they actually have a couple of precision modes where they can put in sort of coarse and fine inputs into the vehicle. That's all stuff that they can control off of those touchscreen displays to get the right amount of impulsive thrust into the vehicle. If you're trying to get a little bit oriented to how the vehicle is positioned, that's the nose cone on the top of your screen. So Bob and Doug would be sitting sort of underneath that nose cone and see towards the side hatch, which is currently sealed underneath on the opposite side of where that nose cone is. Very cool to see those thruster plumes.
Yeah, the Kronos emission control Houston actually opened up the iris a little bit on that camera on the space station so we could see these plumes.
SpaceX Dragon. We've completed the docking axis capture maneuver. We're going to move on to the YZ translation.
Copy, we're with you.
All right, sounds like they've got themselves lined up exactly on the docking axis, so directly in front of that international docking adapter on node 2. Now they're going to begin some lateral and axial maneuvers. So again, just putting Dragon now off the docking axis, and to just continue these translational maneuvers. So at this point, we should see them head up to the right and up from this view, as they're just making very small adjustments in the Dragon's positioning in front of the space station right now.
Here comes the translation.
We copy.
Yeah, in the data, it looks like we're seeing the 6 thrusters essentially on the bottom of the spacecraft right now from this view, lighting up. So it's going to begin to move them straight up. It's difficult to tell, but there is a very slow drift upward right now.
Yeah, it looks like they're going about 0.1 meters a second, if I'm looking at this data correctly. So very slow and steady. And they will probably do a quick correction to stop that upward movement. It's a little surreal seeing Dragon so close to the space station. You know, less than 18 hours ago, I was on the pad at Launch Complex 39A. Now it's so close to its destination.
Being piloted by humans for the second time already in this mission.
And I would just be too excited. I don't know how Bob and Doug keep this so professional.
That test pilot mentality.
They both have thousands of hours in aircraft. Both test pilots.
Yeah, both came from military test pilot backgrounds. Bob Bank in the Air Force, Doug Hurley, a Marine Corps aviator.
And then I believe Naval Test Pilot School, so. A little bit overexposed there, but you can still see the thrusters firing.
Yeah, our Kronos working to do that deliberately for us so we can see those thruster plumes from this camera view. We're at a normal exposure, so not able to see those jets into the darkness of space. But when we
Like structures on it that are covered in micro switches and sensors, and when we do finally screen, so Bob and Doug. How the balloon has to catch the light just the right way for us to even see that it's happening outside of data.
Tak już są.
Now, I know we've mentioned this a few times, but it looks like the spacecraft are totally still right now, and that's partially true. They're still relative to each other. But right now, both the space station and Dragon are going around the world. What is it, about once every 90-ish minutes?
Yep.
Or less?
once every 90 minutes, seeing 16 sunrises and sunsets every single day. And while our view right now,
moving on to the Y.
We copy, we're with you.
Copy. So I was a little bit mistaken. They just finished up the Z direction, doing the Y next.
Dragon SpaceX on Big Loop, you have used approximately 1/3 of your prop test budget.
Dragon copies 1/3 of the prop test budget.
So the Corps letting the crew know how much prop they've worked through. Still have 2/3 of their budget left to do test maneuvers. And of course, any bit of propellant that they're using is just a little bit less margin if they needed to use it for something else. But good way to exercise the system, see that manual piloting works as intended, and I'm sure for them to have a chance to provide some feedback on how manual piloting actually felt in space and how the control felt.
yeah, a big part of their job for this mission is really to not only put the vehicle through its paces, but to take a lot of detailed notes and mental notes that they're going to be passing along to any future crew members flying on board Crew Dragon. As we've talked about, the simulators have been a pretty good guide for how the actual manual piloting goes, but things like the ascent up to orbit were quite a bit different from what they expected. And so they're just taking all of that in, internalizing it, and a big part of their job once they come home is to pass that along to all of our upcoming crews, one of which is targeted to launch just about a month after they come home. That Crew 1 outfit of 3 NASA astronauts, Victor Glover, Mike Hopkins, and Shannon Walker, and a Japanese astronaut, Soichi Noguchi. We'll be aiming to do that flight a little bit later this year. So going through the paces right now, looking at our data, I think I made the same mistake you did, where I assumed them going up would be the y-axis. It looks like that was actually their z-axis, and the y now then moving to the right. So we're seeing some small shifts. They're continuing to use up a little bit of their prop budget. We heard they're already a little past 1/3.
Yeah, it's actually something interesting about both aircraft and rockets. When you consider the coordinate system, what we refer to as the x-axis is usually the one that goes through the nose. So in the case of Falcon 9 and Dragon sitting on top of each other, the x-axis would have been pointing through the nose cone going up. Can be a little bit counterintuitive. Then actually in aircraft, the z-axis usually points down, depending on whether you use European or American coordinate systems and the type of aircraft you're working on. But important for both Space Station and Dragon to be on the same coordinate system as they do this eventually as they step into the approach maneuvers here towards waypoint 2. Dragon will be using its relative navigation sensors, again, for relative position to the station, to make sure that it's on the approach, within the bounds of the approach corridor going towards the station when we get to that after this manual piloting test.
Should be getting to that shortly. This manual piloting test was slated to last about 25 minutes. As we have been running ahead of schedule today with all of Dragon's maneuvers. We could be looking at a docking only about 25 or 30 minutes from now. So once they're done with this manual flight test, they'll turn control back over to Dragon's flight computers, and they'll resume their approach, which had actually already started automatically before the crew issued a hold command to the vehicle. And then they'll press in to arrive at waypoint number 2, at which point the teams will do a final go, no-go for docking. They'll depart that 20-meter hold point, and it should be just about 5 minutes following that departure until we get contact and captured.
Yeah, and the crew right now are seated in Dragon in the pilot and commander's seat. Both of them are suited for what are relatively dynamic maneuvers. And they'll continue to be suited until we have confirmation of good hard capture on the space station. So right now, just interfacing with the touchscreen displays, testing out manual piloting. Hopefully secretly a little bit giddy to be piloting a spacecraft.
I mean, before they had launched, Bob Behnken had referred to this mission as every astronaut's dream, getting to launch in a new spacecraft.
Можете видеть крем дрангу. Можете писать до Discord.
But they're still stepping through this manual piloting. We should have just a few more minutes until they're done with this y-axis translation.
Ďakujem tí, čo ma pozeráte. A ak máte nejaké otázky, môžete napísať do chatu alebo do Discordu. Oh yeah. Napíšete, ja mám odpoviem.
Dragon will autonomously go towards waypoint
Craft.
adapter on node 2. And it'll hold there.
A môžete napísať hoci čo.
Both in Houston and here in Hawthorne. If you do a go-no-go poll, make sure that the vehicle still looks healthy. Make sure that everyone on board the space station and of course on board Dragon.
Translation maneuvers, we're going to pick up with the closure maneuver.
Recopy, we're following along with you.
All right, sounds like they're done with their translations. They're going to start moving it back to the docking axis, put us right back on the center line, and then we're going to resume that approach into station.
Why?
Dragon SpaceX, you have used 2/3 of your prop test budget.
I can copy 2/3 of the budget. complete the closure maneuver.
We copy, closure maneuver complete.
We'll move on to 4.041, section 4.
We copy and concur.
Doufám, že ma počujete.
So our manual flight test has been completed. We're standing by for them to now resume approach 1. So to move in that waypoint 1, we're already inside of the keep out sphere at this point. Dragon's holding just 176 meters from the space station. Pretty soon they're going to be approaching.
Dragon completes the manual pilot demonstration. I only had to twist Doug's arm for 2 or 3 minutes to get him to allow me to deactivate the piloting controls.
Copy. Excellent. Thank you. And with that, we ask that you, from the display used for manual piloting, please go to audio settings and adjust a gain setting for seat 1 or 4. And in addition, we would appreciate any handling qualities evaluation of the proximity piloting possible.
Completed the gain setting adjustment for seat 1, and I'll turn it over to Doug for the handling qualities.
A počkej si nahrať
SpaceX Dragon on the big
KS.
for the handling
KSS, Kerbal Space Program.
My congratulations to the folks on board. That flew really well, very crisp. It was a little sloppier in but all the other activities as well as closure were all just as perfect.
Excellent to hear. Thank you.
What have you done? What have you done?
Excellent to hear. Thank you.
Počkajte. Je to celkom nudné, ja som že iba 10 sekúnd, minút.
Bob and Doug have had lots of opportunities to test this out and sim it and give their feedback. And pretty cool to hear that their sim experience was very similar to what they saw actually on orbit. Just, I think you said 170 meters away from station right now?
Yeah, we're just 176, and I imagine as a spacecraft designer, that's exactly what you want to hear, is the way that I train you in it here on the ground is exactly how it performed once you're there for the real thing. So the second manual piloting test in the books, Bob and Doug putting Dragon through its paces. Now we're time to put it all to where we get to our endpoint. We're ready to get Dragon docked to the International Space Station.
Dragon SpaceX on Big Loop. The ground will be resuming approach shortly. We do plan to hold briefly at waypoint 2, so reminder that crew visors down are not required until the ground is preparing to command the final approach.
Thanks, Dragon. We copy. We'll hold at waypoint 2 for a pause, and then we'll get our visors then once you command.
We copy.
And station hits Houston on the Big Loop. As you've heard, Endeavour is resuming its approach to waypoint 2. Chris, you can monitor now for step 2. That's step 2 and 1.104 Crew Dragon approach and retrieve monitor.
Step 2 will work.
Pretty cool view of the International Space Station from Dragon. This would actually be overlaid on the displays on top of this view. And we got to see some pretty cool views from behind. Actually, there's a view right there. You can see the station on their displays. Visors up, Doug in the left seat, Bob in the right seat.
Yeah, so at this moment, Dragon is going to be resuming the approach. As we heard them informing the crew, they're going to have that one final hold when they're just 20 meters away. That's going to be at waypoint 2. We're expecting it to be a brief hold while the teams all tag up and do a final go to move in for docking. Getting a great look at the space station itself. The docking port is right in the center of our screen. You can see another spacecraft currently docked to the space station, the Japanese HTV spacecraft currently docked to the Earth-facing port. One of those common berthing mechanisms also on Node 2. So Dragon will be the second vehicle to be docked to the Harmony module once it makes its final approach. And it's moving in right now. Again, just to give you an idea of how quickly they're moving, they're going at about 0.3 of a meter per second right now. And so if you're having any trouble with that docking simulator online, remember to just slow things down a little bit, and your chances will go up exponentially. We just passed 140 meters away. We'll get our live video comm back with the space station momentarily. As soon as we do, we'll bring you back up there. But for now, Bob and Doug continuing to fly in. They're just 135 meters away.
Station on the big loop in step 2, review of steps 3 and 4 is complete. Crew on the International Space Station is ready for docking.
Station Houston on the big loop, we copy the review of 3 and 4 complete. International Space Station ready, thank you.
Expedition 63 Commander Chris Cassidy giving the report. Station is ready for docking.
Yeah, you can see the trajectory of the spacecraft. There are small corrections that are happening. So as we get closer and closer to station, we're trying to stay within those 2 corridors, which are shown coming out of the docking port that we're going towards. That little dot, I think, was the 20-meter hold point. So that's where we expect there to be the spacecraft holding right in front of the International Docking Adapter. There'll be a go, no-go poll. The ground teams have worked hard over the past probably years to come up with a set of what we call flight rules. So those are technical constraints, items that we look for, that if any of those criteria were violated, then we have a rule that we've predetermined, gives us guidance to say whether we could approach or not. So far, our vehicle has been very healthy, but technical ground teams will all do their due diligence to make sure that it's still safe to approach.
At this moment, that approach is continuing, still moving in at about 0.3 of a meter per second. Dragon's coming up on just 100 meters away from the space station.
So the very top there is the nose cone on the spacecraft, where we've got a cool view. Left side of your screen is the International Space Station. Right side of your screen is Dragon.
We're inside 100 meters, continuing to close. Again, we're going to have a short hold at 20 meters. Teams will just do a final check, and then they'll give Dragon the go. We're expecting it to be pretty brief. We should get to that hold point in just about 4 minutes, moving at our current pace.
I think you can see a meatball and American flag on on the spacecraft. The NASA logo, of course, referred to as the meatball. I think there was some spirited discussion about the meatball versus the worm during ascent. And you can see those logos. That structure on the fairing structure is actually what the Super Dracos are housed in. Of course, all of those are deactivated now, only used for launch escape during the ascent portion. Nose cone right at the top of the vehicle, and you can see sort of the ceiling surface, those those 4 circular slots right underneath the nose cone within that red ring are the Ford bulkhead Dracos. That's what we were using while we were conducting all those burns, the 5 burns to get to this point. Right now, we don't have a reason to use those. We'll only be making small attitude corrections with the service section Dracos. You can see the service section actually pretty clearly here too. There's a black portion and a white portion sort of separated by a fin. The black portion is solar panels, solar cells that'll charge Dragon's batteries, and the bottom side are the white portion is actually a thermal radiator that's used to keep the spacecraft nice and cool. Of course, the avionics and the cabin, making sure that Bob and Doug are comfortable inside.
Looks like we're getting the shadow cast. We are just 60 meters away, continuing to close in, just about 40 meters to go until we're at that hold point. Should get there in just over 2 minutes. Meanwhile, teams in Hawthorne and in Houston doing their internal go, no-go for docking. So you're going to get all the teams pulled. Once everyone's go, we'll be able to give Dragon the final go-ahead for the vehicle to autonomously fly in and dock with the International Space Station. Should be coming up on waypoint 2 arrival in just about 1 minute, 45 seconds. At this point, it'll be 20 meters away from that docking port. The International Docking Adapter number 2 attached to pressurized mating adapter number 2 at the very forward end of the Harmony module.
Right there on the, right around the center, you can see the Ford hatch. It's got a window in it. You can see a couple of handles. And there's some features that look sort of bronze-ish. Those are the pedals that we were talking about earlier as part of the soft capture system. So pretty wild, too, to see. We're so close that we're getting shadows from the station on Dragon. Wow.
And we're getting these views of Dragon's approach from 2 cameras that are right next to that docking adapter. And the movement's a little jarring at times. These cameras are being commanded by a person at the Cronus console in Mission Control Houston, and they send some very basic function commands to the camera, which it then executes automatically. And so they're continuing to follow Dragon in, so we do thank them for their diligence to give us these views of this historic moment as we are just less than 30 meters away from docking.
Right above the NASA meatball logo, you can see 3 of the service section Draco thrusters.
That's right, 12 in all. So 4 of those clusters spread around the vehicle, used for a lot of the attitude control and any small translational maneuvers.
No, tak si to zapnę, to wyszłam tu.
And actually oriented in a way too, where if you were to lose some of those thrusters, you still have redundancy and control in those axes. So that's part of the reason why they are.
All right, so we should be getting to waypoint 2 right now. So it looks like we do have that hold.
Dragon SpaceX on Big Loop. The ground is go for approach 2. We will be enabling the resume shortly. As a reminder, ensure your visors are closed prior to Dragon's departure from the waypoint. And once Dragon is inside the crew hands-off point, retreat and breakout are not permitted. And for your awareness, we have sunset in a little less than 8.5 minutes.
Copies all on the Big Loop. Go for docking.
Doug on the spacecraft confirming their go for docking. They're going to put down their visors. Got some instructions there about the crew hands-off point that we had talked about earlier. That's a point where we don't want the crew issuing any commands to the vehicle. It's about just about 2 meters away from the docking adapter. I believe the number is about 1.7 meters.
Station Houston on the Big Loop. Houston and station are now go for docking. Chris, you can monitor for steps 3 and 4. 3 and 4 in 1.104 Crew Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Copy steps 3 and 4.
Next Dragon on the big loop. Our visors are down.
Copy, visors down.
Predict.
With the crew confirming their visors down, we should see the final approach resume.
Station Dragon on the big loop. We are inbound from approach 2.
Copy, inbound.
Station copy.
And we're going to be racing that sunset. The approach has resumed. Dragon closing in. We're inside 20 meters. And yeah, that crew hands-off point should come up in about 3 minutes or so. Right before we get that final docking, it comes about 20 seconds prior, or just about 2 meters away from the station still. And that's just the crew not issuing any abort commands. At that point, it would be too late. And so any aborts would be executed automatically by Dragon itself. So we're closing in at less than 1/10 of a meter per second at this point.
You can see the service section Dracos just doing all these very small, minor attitude corrections. Really, the autonomous docking system at work, making sure that the vestibule and the self-capture system is lined up with IDA2, the international docking adapter. You can see much more clearly there the hinge mechanism for the nose cone. Those 4 black circles are the forward bulkhead Dracos, not to be used at this time. And then, of course, the pedals of the soft capture system.
Ok. Aktualizujem Twitter.
Dragon on the big loop. We're inside 10 meters. We cannot make out the docking target, but we do see the outline.
We copy and concur, 10 meters.
Right, we're less than 10 meters away. Again, we're closing at that rate of less than 1/10 of a meter per second. We should be just about 1 minute 45 seconds away from docking.
There's a
O 45
camera
sekund.
right in that middle, so you can see where the forward hatch is. And right in the middle of that, there's a window and there's a centerline camera that is aligned.
And we are just
Tak.
5 meters
Už to za
away.
chvíli už bude pár
Again, we're
sekund.
racing that sunset. This Dragon continues to close, 4 meters to go.
Those shadows of the space station on the vehicle.
Za
Yeah,
chvíľku.
you can actually see the centerline camera pretty clearly there, sort of with the contrast of the sun right now.
3 meters to go.
Twitter.
Two meters.
2 metre.
We are inside the hands-off point, the chop, the crew hands-off point. 1 meter to go.
1 meter. A?
Soft capture complete.
Dragon in soft capture confirmed. Stand by for retraction and docking.
Inside.
And we just heard it, soft capture. We have docking, that coming at 7:16 a.m. Pacific time, with the station and Dragon flying 262 statute miles right over the border between northern China and Mongolia.
You saw a little bit of motion there of Dragon. It was that relative motion that the soft capture system is damping out. Once that motion is clear, then the soft capture system will be retracted, and Dragon will go for hard capture.
Again, if just now tuning in,
Yes.
that soft
Yes!
capture, that docking
Yes!
time, 7:16
Get on them!
a.m. Pacific, 10:16
Get
a.m.
on
over on
them!
the East Coast. Dragon and the International Space Station were flying 262 statute miles right over the border between northern China and Mongolia. So that soft capture ring now going to retract. It's one more step on the way to docking complete.
On board.
Yeah, and so the next step here is once the soft capture ring is retracted, there are 12 latches that we refer to as hard capture latches. Those are what will really create that pressure-tight seal between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station. So once soft capture is complete, and I believe we'll get that call from our core here, Anna, then we'll get confirmation of hard capture, and the crew, of course, aboard have this information on their displays, so they'll also see indication of hard capture complete. And once those two steps are done, then that's docking complete.
Right, we're expecting to hear some words from everybody. A pretty monumental moment. I mean, for Doug Hurley, he's returning to where he last docked almost 9 years ago on the very last space shuttle mission, now commanding the very first commercial spacecraft to deliver astronauts to the International Space Station.
That's got to be cool for them. They've mentioned quite a few times that they're best friends, our favorite dads in space, as we've been calling them. This has got to be really cool for them. It's got to be really cool for their families too, watching this.
It looks like we have another quick handover. We'll get that video back shortly. We're about 75% complete already with that retraction. Once that retraction is completed, we'll keep an eye out for the 12 ready to hook indicators. Once those are ready, those 12 hooks will begin to engage, and that'll securely attach Dragon to the International Space Station.
Yeah, so right now the vehicle confirming that the soft capture system is deployed correctly and is fully retracted. And then once the soft capture system is fully retracted, that'll set up the vehicle to put in the hard capture pins. There's 12 of those around the docking ring, and that's what creates that airtight seal between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station. The volume between, which we refer to as the vestibule, is currently not pressurized. Of course, it was just exposed to the vacuum of space until literally minutes ago, about 4 minutes ago. So just waiting for the vehicle to get that.
Dragon SpaceX, ring retraction complete. Docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
All right, so we see those ready to hook indicators are lighting up green. So we should be just about to step into those 12 hooks beginning to engage to get that secure mate between Dragon and the International Docking Adapter on the space station.
Wow, right now those two vehicles are flying together. They are attached to each other.
It's been just under 19 hours since we lifted off. We're actually at about 18 hours, 58 minutes, and 42 seconds. So we promised about a 19-hour ride up to station, and we made it just a few minutes before that. They were able to dock a few minutes ahead of schedule. We were tracking them to still take about another 10 minutes, but able to step through all of their burns about 16 minutes ahead of schedule and get us to where we are now. If you missed it just a few moments ago, that initial docking coming at 7:16 a.m. Pacific, 10:16 a.m. over on the east coast of the United States, and they were 262 statute miles
Sim,
flying
sim.
together over the northern border of China and Mongolia.
Oda.
So really exciting.
Oda.
We're just waiting for this docking complete to be confirmed. We're expecting to hear some words, obviously, from the crew on board and all the excited teams down here. We're just waiting for this moment. And then it's time to start getting Dragon integrated into the station. There will be an umbilical that will get mated, and that will allow Dragon to flow data and power into the station systems, and then it'll be over to the crew.
Endeavour and station at Houston on the big loop. MCS is configured. We're proceeding with hook driving.
All right, and they did a quick, so the motion control system onboard station now back under those control moment gyros, so handed over from the Russian thrusters, and Dragon now given the go to drive those hooks. We have to do that changeover of attitude control before we drive those hooks, as the Russian thrusters a little bit more dynamic in their control of attitude, and if you had a thruster firing while you were starting to drive those hooks, that could miss a line. So going over to the smoother control moment gyros on the U.S. side, now controlling the attitude on board the station, and those hooks, those 12 hooks on Dragon, about to start driving.
Right now, Dragon and ISS attached, just flying off the east coast of China, just underneath Japan. Attached to each other, we recently passed over to the orbital night, so we're on the currently the dark side of the world. And actually, we're lucky enough to see soft capture happen just as we were crossing over the terminator line.
And if you're wondering what you're looking at, this is one of the cameras on the very outboard part of the Japanese experiment module, looking back in towards the very front part of Node 2, where Dragon is currently docked. We are in an orbital nighttime, that's why everything is so dark, but you're looking at Dragon. It is horizontal to the ground, so the hatch part is right where that green light pretty much is. You can see the nose cone still illuminated above it, and it is currently attached to an international docking adapter on the International Space Station.
And inside that capsule are Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, first astronauts to fly on a privately developed vehicle up to the International Space Station. Both test pilots got to do some fun tests today. Have a few more steps before they can actually get aboard and ingress to the International Space Station. And that's what we heard over the big loop. That transition, which allows us to then proceed with hard capture.
And we're seeing the first set of hooks, so the first 6 out of the 12 are now closed, 6 more to go.
Again, there are 12 of those along the ring. And that helps us ensure that we have an airtight seal. It is vacuum around them right now, so we want to make sure we're keeping all of that valuable life support in the vehicle. Now the combined ISS Dragon vehicle.
Meanwhile, inside the capsule, Bob and Doug also standing by for this hard capture to complete. And once we have that docking complete call, they'll be able to start stepping through a number of procedures to get them ready to move into the International Space Station. They'll get the go-ahead to doff or get out of their suits, and then they'll have some activities on the Dragon side to prepare for the hatch opening. Chris Cassidy will mainly be working on the station side to pressurize the vestibule. So as Shiv has talked about, the space between the Dragon capsule and the space station was exposed to vacuum, and even after this tight seal has occurred, we'll still be at vacuum inside. So we'll actually open up a valve to supply air from the station side into that space between the Dragon and station hatchways, and they'll get it up to the same ambient pressure that we'll have inside of Dragon and on the station itself. They'll wait for it to thermally balance out, make sure we don't have any temperature swings as we're bringing it up from vacuum. So probably from a very cold temperature up to about 72 degrees that they have in their cabin temperature on board the station, and then we'll get the hatches open.
Dragon SpaceX, hard capture complete. Stand by for docking completion.
And now that hard capture is complete, so that's confirmation of those 12 latches to create that airtight seal. Now that's complete. The umbilicals from the station side will interface with the Dragon vehicle umbilicals, and that'll provide power and communications through space station directly to Dragon. Pretty much the whole way up, Dragon's been using the sun to make sure that it has enough electrical power for the journey up.
Ako otázku.
And we're just standing by now. Now for that umbilical to get mated, and that's gonna, again, as Shiv was just saying, start the power and data transfer between Dragon and the space station. They've been transmitting data through RF radio frequency on the way uphill, and during the final approach, this will give a hard mate, basically a wired LAN connection between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station itself, and then also being able to draw power from the station systems using those great big solar arrays that are used to generate all of the electricity for systems on board the station. The soft capture system has been stowed. We see the umbilical starting to deploy. About 40% of the way so far, going pretty quickly. Should just take a couple more seconds until we're all the way connected. And then we should be getting that docking complete call out from the core here in Mission Control, SpaceX and Hawthorne. Standing by.
Dragon SpaceX, docking sequence is complete.
Suspeni! Sobą spojeni! Yes!
That Dragon recovery docking complete. To say that it's been a real honor to be just a small part of this 9-year endeavor since the last time a United States spaceship has docked with the International Space Station. We have to congratulate the men and women of SpaceX at Hawthorne, McGregor, and at Kennedy Space Center. Their incredible efforts over the last several years to make this possible cannot go overstated. I'd also like to thank Kathy Leaders and her team of the Commercial Crew Program of NASA. An outstanding job by everyone. I'd like to thank the men and women of the National Aeronautics and Space Agency. This is an incredible time to be at NASA. 3 new vehicles to be flown, continuing mission in low Earth orbit, and then to the moon and Mars. We thank you again and congratulate you.
Dragon arriving. Crew of Expedition 63 is honored to welcome Dragon and the Commercial Crew Program to welcome aboard the International Space Station. Bob and Doug, glad to have you as part of the crew. Well done. Bravo Zulu.
happy. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Endeavour, this is Houston. Bob and Doug, welcome to the International Space Station after your spectacular rendezvous and docking of the first Crew Dragon vehicle. For the first time since the retirement of the Space Shuttle, you've completed